Hi there, and welcome to Ancestral Recall. This is the Magic web series that illustrates and explores 20 years of Magic's history. I'm your host, Eli Kaplan. Today, we're going to look at the follow-up to Mercadian Masks, Nemesis. Overview. Nemesis is the second set in Masks block and has 143 cards. The set had Masks block's only named keyword, Fading. Now, Fading permanents came into play with a set number of Fading counters, which ticked down each upkeep. The controller had to sacrifice the permanent when they couldn't remove a Fading counter. So when they removed the last counter, the permanent stuck around for one more turn. Many of these permanents had activated abilities that were paid for by removing Fading counters. While the mechanic appears to be all downside at first glance, these cards were all attractively priced for their mana costs and quite powerful. Wizards revisited this mechanic in Planar Chaos with Vanishing, a nearly identical mechanic that was compatible with the various cards in Time Spiral block that used time counters. Fading counters are not time counters, sadly, and it was a decision that Wizards said they wished they could retcon. But thanks to the existence of Parallax Inhibitor, they're stuck. A really neat cycle in the set were the seals. These common seals replicated classic effects in each color, but players preemptively cast them as enchantments that sat on the table until they were ready to be broken. This cycle was flavorful, feeling like old-school D&D, and it forced opponents to play accordingly. Yeah, seals took away the surprise value of a Giant Growth or Dark Banishing or Unsummon, but not having to pay mana for the effects at the crucial moments was a huge advantage. Now, some players prefer keeping their threats open, and other players prefer hiding them. Seals expand the range of options for deck builders. I would appreciate Wizards printing more seals in the future. Now, suffice it to say, you should definitely try these out in your Pauper decks and cubes. Nemesis had more rebels and mercenaries that could recruit, with 3 unusual twists. Green, blue, and red got a recruiter that could search your library for an elf, merfolk, or goblin, and drop it into play, without caring about mana cost. So you could fetch a Siegegang Commander, or a Wirewood Guardian, or any Changeling. It's a shame Changelings never took off in Constructed. There are a number of callbacks in Nemesis to Tempest block as well. Flowstone's +X/-X ability comes back on a few cards. The core are all over white, and they have the same size stats as Tempest core. Sadly, there are no slivers or spikes in the set. There are lots of name similarities and returning characters such as Rath and Crovax. Story overview. Before Scars of Mirrodin, before Return to Ravnica, there was Nemesis, the first time we had returned to a major plane besides the default setting of Dominaria. Nemesis returned us to Rath, a plane that had been controlled by the fascist Evankar Volrath. But this set shows the plane in turmoil as Volrath abdicates his position. Now, I don't remember whether it was voluntarily or not, and the former brooding tragic hero of the crew of Weatherlight, Crovax, takes the seat, embracing Yawgmoth's desire. Crovax came to Rath with Gerard and the rest of the crew and saw visions of his long-lost love, Selenia the Angel. But whispers came to him from Yawgmoth and told him that he could be reunited with his love if he gave his fealty to Phyrexia. Yawgmoth knew that Volrath was a much better planner and administrator, but when it came to slaughter, Crovax was the person to lead his armies. The Skyshroud Elves and Encore were rebelling as the plane's beasts and minions formed ranks to prepare for the Phyrexian invasion. The Evankars had been breeding armies of Pharaoh Mogs and Lacoliths to overwhelm the Dominarian forces. But Eladonri, leader of the Skyshroud Elves, gets to his finest hour as he rallies the Elves and Core for one last push against Crovax's increased brutality. I recall reading the novel for this set, and while I forget most of the details, I recall it being actually pretty good. Now, before I get started, I just want to make a few corrections to my last episode, the Masks Retrospective. Specifically, I forgot to mention Unmask, one of the powerful free spells. Now, Control was really dominant in the format, so the potential to hit a key component on turn 1 before counter magic could happen was worth discarding a black card all the time. Brian Davis won a Pro Tour on the back of Forum Masks. I also want to hype Gush, one of the most dominant draw spells in Magic. In aggro control archetypes or decks that play more than one land per turn, the drawback of returning 2 lands to your hand was negligible. In my favorite deck of all time, in fact, Gush is a card advantage engine. Gush has been on and off the restricted list for a reason. Famous cards!
Blinding Angel. If this baby hits you, you don't get to attack. Now that's powerful. Now this card was an absolute beating in Limited, and it got played some in Standard. Wizards hasn't printed another creature with this particular ability since. Now I hesitate to put this in the cube because locking a person out of combat isn't fun, but you might not have such inhibitions. Defiant Falcon. This replaced Remosian Lieutenant in the 2-drop spot of the Rebel Chain because it had evasion, but when Fire of Fire and Ice entered the format, suddenly that extra point of toughness mattered because one fire could take out both the Falcon and your Sergeant. Some decks went back to Lieutenant. Defiant Vanguard, the best answer in block to Blastoderm. If it can recruit the guy out, that's even better. However, most Rebel decks preferred to search for another 3-drop. Namely, Lin Civi Defiant Hero. Oh man, this was one of the most dominating legends of its day. Now I have to tell you guys about the history of the Legend rule. The Legend rule has changed several times throughout Magic's history. Now, when Lin Civi was in Standard, the rule was that if someone had a Lin Civi in play, the other player had to sacrifice a Lin Civi as soon as it came into play as a state-based effect. Eventually, with Kamigawa, that got overturned, so that when you played your Legend of the same name, both of them died. But at the time, the only answer to Lin Civi in the Rebel Mirror match was Prophecy's Rebel Informer, or clearing the board with Wrath of God, then playing your own. Or Last Breath, but let's not talk about Last Breath. The restocking ability was also extremely essential in control matchups. If you run a Rebel deck, you have to be running Lin Civi. Parallax Wave. Lockdown. This awesome Oblivion Ring variant could wipe away several creatures for a few turns, or one for quite a few turns. It's like Sleep on steroids. Once in a rare while, this was used preemptively as an insurance plan against Wrath of God. You could protect your own creatures. Lightbringer and Lawbringer. Now, these two guys gave Rebel decks access to an amazing removal package to deal with enemy guys of the appropriate colors. Once you had enough mana, you get to reuse them with Lin Civi to just recycle and wipe out opposing black or red armies. These guys were really good sideboard tech. Voice of Truth. Now, this card completed the mega cycle that started in the Urza Saga and continued in Urza's Destiny. We had 2/2 uncommon angels that came into play with protection from one of the 5 colors. Voice of Truth was the last. Or at least so we thought. It turned out that Planeshift, 1 year later, had one more in store, Voice of All, which was the best of the lot. Though it did require 1 more white in its casting cost. Accumulated Knowledge. Now, in Old Extended, Accumulated Knowledge was an amazingly powerful draw suite for blue decks. It was especially potent in the mirror match because, you know, with 3 or 4 between both graveyards, someone could play it and draw 5. Using Intuition for 3 of these was a powerful end-of-turn threat. Not quite on par with Fact or Fiction, but it was close. Daze, man. Daze is another amazing tool for control. Now, this free 4 spikes drawback was minor enough that this card still sees play in Legacy and even Vintage. Dominate. Instant speed control magic? It can't even be disenchanted? Holy crap. Now, I know it costs ridiculous amounts to play, but it was a fine sideboard card in Standard for draw-go decks. I can't think of another control magic effect that is instant like this. Okay, Vidalcan Shackles, but, you know, that can be disenchanted. I have no problem with Naturalize. It's just that, in my brain, anything that removes artifacts and enchantments, in my head, it's still disenchant. This card isn't as bad as Mudhole, but this is definitely the loser rare of the set. Pale Moon, aka, God, please don't open this, please don't open this. That's what players would say when they were opening up sealed decks at PTQs. This card was so situational because you had to play it on your opponent's upkeep if you wanted to shut them down, and they could just tap and get their colored mana in response. Seriously, this card is epically bad.
Parallax Tide. This spell allowed blue standard decks to be virtual land destruction decks, shutting off an opponent's early mana production for 2 turns before biting the dust. This card was so frustrating at the time. Now, if you happen to be super sneaky Armageddon guy, playing this before Armageddon can save you a lot of lands. But if you're that guy and are watching this video, I hate you so much. So much. Ugh, I hate Armageddon. But if you were dead set on playing with pirates, Parallax Tide was a necessity. And the land hate continued. Rising Waters was the fixed Winter Orb, doubling the casting cost. And still, people played it in Standard. Rootwater Thief. This is Mike Long's invitational card. Mark Rosewater and I are the only people who want Long to get into the Hall of Fame, I think. Oh, and by the way, hey Wizards! I used to do coverage for you guys. I covered quite a few GPs and a few Pro Tour level events. Can I get a Hall of Fame ballot in the future? Pretty please? Pretty please? Stronghold Zeppelin. Zep rocks! Fly to the Icarus! This high flyer isn't too exciting, but I have this in my cube so I can make this joke. Wandering Eye. If you're John Finkel, you don't need this card, but if you're a lesser blue mage, like myself, you wanted this guy to get perfect information, which helped players navigate control matchups. On the other hand, it also helps the opponent. Ascendant Evankar. Rob the poor, give to the rich. This is definitely a very black card. Now, Wizards really wanted to put Krovax's name on the card, but the story people thought that having 2 legends with the same proper name on them in play would be too confusing. So Krovax goes incognito on this card. Now, the art reminds me of an older Barry Bonds. Here's the alternate version of Krovax, by the way. And then there's this one. He's got more versions than any other legend. Death Pits of Wrath. 2 glorious anthems in 1 card, but you pay a hell of a price. But if you're invested in the late game, this card is awesome. It's also cool in Living Death type decks. Divining Witch is a spell shaper for one of Ice Age's iconic sorceries, Demonic Consultation. Now this spell is Bala. I mean, you're playing really dangerous magic because if you are searching for a one-of and you flip it over in your first 6 cards, oops, you just decked yourself. But so many players played this, it was an excellent card. Consultation. Divining Witch, a little slower. Not nearly as good. Massacre was a key sideboard superstar at the time because it crushed the Rebellion, but good for free. Except for killing that miserable Lynn Civi. Rathy Infiltrator's a nice, cheap mercenary with evasion. In Nemesis, it recruits a grizzly bear that can't block, and a pretty bad 3/3. You know what? Don't worry about that extra text. Just take 3 mana evasion guy, and relax. Seal of Doom. I love this removal spell. Just run it out there, and you don't have to worry about having mana up at the right time. What's the price of peace of mind? 2B. Vicious Hunger. Mike Flores swears by this card. In the land of small guys, yeah, it was a prime removal spell. Today, in 2014, we have Farika's Cure, which is strictly better due to being an instant. But at the time, Vicious Hunger was amazing tech. Volrath the Fallen. There's no evasion on this guy. His stats are anemic for a 6-drop by today's standards, but the potential for massive hits means that if you can give him evasion, he's an actual threat in EDH. One punch! One punch! Ancient Hydra. Believe it or not, this is my favorite red card in my cube. It's not the most powerful by any means, and it isn't hard to deal with. It only has 1 tiny toughness. But in formats with lots of small guys, the Hydra can clear a bunch of chumps and threaten a serious hit, or maybe even 2. This card is a card I've used with finesse to win a lot of cube games. Flame Rift. There are a scant few cards that deal 4 damage for 2 mana. This is one of them, and it's a bear. Flowstone Overseer. This is the premier red fatty of Nemesis. I know. 4/4 for 5 mana, that's a heavy hitter. But Overseer could kill guys or make your other guys hit harder in Limited. There were other Flowstone guys in Tempest, but they could only shift themselves. The Overseer beats the shift out of your opponent's little guys. I also love drafting the common Flowstone Crusher. One of the major cycles in the block was Red's Lacoliths. If blocked, these molten beasts could redirect their fury to a creature controlled by the defending player. This would happen before combat damage happened. This was faster than First Strike, or Double Strike, and they could deal damage to a different creature than the one that blocked it. Now, the Lacoliths aren't in my cube anymore, but if you like combat-oriented cubes, making players care about who wins the fights, these guys are actually fine choices. And like most red cards, they suck on defense, so you want to keep them in the red zone. One of the earliest Magic urban myths was the Throat Wolf, a rumored creature that had the fastest First Strike. While Archetype of Courage or Talroom Champion does the best simulation, I'd say that the Lacoliths are almost as good. There were two powerhouses in green that had fading, and both richly deserve their spots in Zvi Moshewitz's Fires of Yavimaya deck. The first is Blastoderm, a 5/5 with Shroud that usually attack 3 times, though with Fires out, it gets in for 5 4 times. Seriously, it was called the Green Abyss for a reason. Then there was Saproling Burst. This card with Fires of Yavimaya could spit out 2 5/5 tokens with haste. Oh man, there's a reason Zvi called it the fix. Treetop Bracers. Finally, green gets an enchantment that gives a creature actual evasion as opposed to just trample. It took them forever to make this card. It's a shame it's only been reprinted in the core set once or twice. The set's legendary artifact, Predator Flagship, does have the ability to destroy any creature when you have enough mana. I think the flavor text should have been Pull! Rackling and Viceling are callbacks to early artifacts, the Rack and Black Vice. Now, these cards at 4 mana, that's overcosted and easy to remove, but it's nice to see these effects anyway. The other really famous fading permanent is the inherently unfair Tanglewire, which never causes its caster half the problems it does the other guy. This gets played in Legacy and Vintage stacks. I like running lots of basics in EDH as well as card draw, and when you put these two together, Terrain Generator works perfectly. This is a deceptively subtle ramp card that I run in my Simic deck. Let's take a short break for The Price is Right. Final verdict. What are the big pros of Nemesis? The set has some fairly costed, fun creatures, and some neat effects. The Rebels got what they needed to become a real tournament threat, and Eternal and Extended formats got some real goodies with Days and accumulated knowledge. Fading was a mechanic that broke the mold and allowed spikes to finesse their way into wins, and it gave Tempest Block a nice sense of closure. The negative points? Okay, well, the set's really balanced, so nothing really stands out. Is that really a negative? Fading wasn't compatible with Vanishing, they didn't know that at the time, and there were some cards that players could use to aggressively keep their opponents off their mana. I don't like that. Those are the only negative things I can say about the set. Tempest Block wants us wanting more, and Nemesis delivered on that desire. It gave us a real sense of closure, which is a rare thing in Magic. It kept the themes of Masks Block going and got the audience excited for the upcoming evasion. And that's why I'm going to give Nemesis a 6.5 out of 10. Quite good, if not quite great. But it was definitely the high watermark for the block. Thanks for watching Ancestral Recall. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please hit that like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what's the reason for the delay? Now, if there's something you disagree with or like, let me know with the comments below. So, I've also started the Cube series where I'm showing off my cube, which is pretty different from a powered cube, but, it has a lot more power than peasant cubes. So check it out. I talk about a lot of cards which are interesting tech. And, go back and check out my other old set retrospectives. So stay tuned. This is Eli Kaplan signing off for Ancestral Recall. Good games and good luck.